Radical Candor, Chapter 7, Team, Techniques for Avoiding Boredom and Burnout. Chapters 5 and 6 were, at their core, about individual conversations, the one-to-one, the single feedback moment, the specific thing you say to a specific person about a specific situation. Chapter 7 pulls back to a much longer view. This is the chapter about people's careers, not just their current role, not just this quarter, but the arc of what they are trying to build across years or even decades, and what your job as a manager is in relation to that arc. And Kim Scott begins with a statement that I think many managers find genuinely surprising the first time they encounter it. Your job is not to keep everyone on your team. Your job is to put the right people in the right roles, to help them grow in the direction they actually want to grow, and to be honest when that direction does not lead through your team. That sounds on the surface like it might be bad news for the manager. Actively facilitating the career growth of direct reports, even when it means they leave. How does that serve you as a manager, your team, or the organization? The answer, and it is a genuinely good one, is that managers who are known for developing talent attract talent. People want to work for someone who will invest in their growth and be honest about their options, rather than someone who will park them in a comfortable role indefinitely, because losing them would be inconvenient. But before we get to the longer arc, let's start with a distinction Kim Scott makes that is one of the most useful conceptual contributions in this chapter. She separates the people on any team into two broad categories, which she calls rock stars and superstars. And I want to be clear that she is not using those terms in the way they are usually used, where superstar is obviously better and rock star is what you call someone when you are being complimentary but slightly casual. In her framework, both categories are valuable and both are necessary for a healthy team. Superstars are people who are on a steep growth trajectory. They want to be doing something significantly bigger or more complex in a year than they are doing now. They are hungry for new challenges, new scope, new responsibility. Managing them well means constantly finding new things for them to learn and making sure they do not outgrow the role before you have a plan for what comes next. Rock stars are people who are excellent at what they do and who are not primarily motivated by climbing to the next level. They may have achieved exactly the role they wanted. They may have important priorities outside work that mean they do not want a more demanding position. They may simply be people who find deep satisfaction in being the best at a specific thing rather than in the prestige of a higher title. They are the bedrock of institutional knowledge, the people who remember why certain decisions were made 3 years ago, the ones who can onboard a new hire in a way that actually makes the new hire productive rather than just technically employed. The mistake most organizations make is treating the rock star trajectory as a problem to be solved. If you are not growing, something must be wrong. If you have been in the same role for 3 years, you must be stagnating. And so the organization pushes people who are doing excellent, valued work in a direction they do not actually want to go, often by withholding rewards from people who are not pursuing promotion. Kim Scott argues this is a profound misreading of what makes a team work. Promoting your best rock star into a management role they do not want, in order to reward their excellence, often produces a mediocre manager and destroys the thing that made them exceptional in the first place. In the next part, we go deeper into the career conversation itself, which is how you figure out which of these two types you are dealing with and what they actually need from you. Part 2, Career Conversations, the Past, the Present, and the Dream. Kim Scott describes the career conversation in 3 movements, which she borrows from a framework developed by her collaborator Russ Laraway. They go roughly in this order: the past, which tells you who this person actually is; the present, which tells you whether this role is working for them; and the future, which tells you what they are actually aiming at. Most manager-employee conversations about career happen entirely in the present tense. How is this project going? What do you need from me this week? What are your goals for next quarter? These are useful questions. They are not career conversations. They are operational check-ins with a light developmental gloss on top, and people correctly sense the difference even when they cannot name it. The past conversation is something managers almost never have, and it is enormously illuminating when they do. The question is essentially, what has mattered to you in your life, going all the way back? What choices did you make and why? What did you find out about yourself from those choices? What energizes you and what drains you? And when did you first notice that? This is not a therapy session, and it is not a job interview. It is an attempt to understand the person as a continuous human being rather than as a set of skills that happen to be useful to your team right now. And the information you get from it tends to be genuinely surprising, even with people you thought you knew fairly well. There is a famous passage from the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, the 19th century American abolitionist who escaped enslavement and became one of the most powerful writers and speakers of his era, where he describes the exact moment he first felt the pull of what he was capable of. He was a young teenager, still enslaved, and he had illegally learned to read. He found a copy of a book of collected speeches called the Columbian Orator, and reading the arguments for freedom and human dignity, inside it changed something in him permanently. He later wrote that it gave tongue to interesting thoughts of my own soul which had frequently flashed through my mind. I bring that up not to draw a direct comparison between someone's office career trajectory and one of the most extraordinary lives in American history, but because it illustrates something Kim Scott is pointing at. People almost always have a moment, or several moments, where they discovered what they were capable of or what genuinely mattered to them. Those moments are often quite early, often quite personal, and often not obviously connected to what they are doing at work now. But they carry enormous information about where a person's energy actually lives. A manager who knows about those moments, because they asked and actually listened, has a fundamentally different picture of their direct report than one who only knows the contents of the most recent performance review. The future conversation is where most managers start and stop when they engage with careers at all. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Kim Scott has reservations about this question in its standard form, because most people, when asked it in a professional context, give a professional context answer, a version of their current role but bigger, or the title of the next level up. The actual answer, if the relationship is good enough to get to it, is often much more interesting and much less linear. She suggests asking what she calls the dream question. Not where do you want to be in 5 years, but what would you be doing if you were the best possible version of yourself in your professional life? Allow the answer to be ambitious, even unrealistically ambitious. Someone might tell you they want to start their own company. Someone might tell you they actually want to be a writer. Someone might tell you the dream is to be really excellent at exactly what they are doing now, which is also a completely valid and underserved answer. Whatever the dream is, the job of the manager is not to evaluate its feasibility but to understand it, because once you understand where someone is trying to go, you can start thinking about whether there is a path from here toward there, and whether your team is on it. In the next part, we get to the hardest part of this chapter, the conversations about people who are not working out, and the uncomfortable reality that honoring someone's potential sometimes means telling them the truth about a role they have been in too long. Part 3, the people problem, hiring, firing, and the hardest conversation of all. Kim Scott is clear about something that management training tends to soft-pedal significantly. Keeping someone in a role that is not working for them or for the team, out of kindness or out of avoidance or out of a reluctance to have a hard conversation, is not kind. It is a slow cruelty dressed up as patience. She uses a phrase that Colin Powell apparently used often. Being responsible sometimes means making people angry. The context is not belligerence. The context is that avoiding the hard conversation, the one that tells someone honestly that they are in the wrong role or that their performance has not improved after a clear opportunity to do so, is not neutral. It costs the person time. Time they could have spent finding a role that actually suited them, or improving somewhere else, or making a decision about their career from a position of honest information, rather than soft, reassuring feedback that did not match the reality of how things were going. The historical example I want to use here is not from business but from science, because it is clarifying. Charles Darwin famously delayed publishing his theory of evolution by natural selection for approximately 20 years after he had worked it out, partly out of genuine intellectual caution and a desire to accumulate more evidence, but also, by his own accounts in his letters, out of anxiety about the reception. He knew it would be controversial. He knew it would hurt some people's firmly held beliefs. He knew some colleagues would be angry. And so he sat on it and revised it and accumulated evidence until Alfred Russel Wallace independently arrived at the same theory in 1858 and sent Darwin a draft, at which point Darwin rushed to publish before losing priority entirely. This is not exactly a failure of radical candor in the managerial sense, but the underlying dynamic is familiar. The knowledge that a hard truth would hurt people, held back year after year, serving nobody, until an external forcing function made the conversation unavoidable. Darwin's delay cost him 20 years of potential scientific progress in the field. The manager's equivalent is keeping a struggling team member in a role for 12 or 18 months longer than the evidence warrants, because the conversation that would end or change the situation is uncomfortable to have. Kim Scott's practical advice on this is direct. If someone is genuinely in the wrong role or performing at a level that is genuinely not sustainable, the compassionate thing is to be clear about it early, give a specific and fair opportunity to address it, and then be honest if the opportunity is not taken. The conversation that says this is not working, and here is specifically why is a harder conversation in the short term than another round of gentle hints. But the alternative is to let someone spend another 6 months in a situation that is not going anywhere, which is a far worse gift to give them. On the hiring side, Kim Scott's advice is equally direct but positive. Hire slowly. The desperation hire, the person you take on because you needed someone in the role 2 months ago and this person was available, is one of the most expensive decisions a manager makes, because the cost is not just the salary. It is the time and energy of everyone on the team who has to work around the fit problem, while you delay the decision you already know you have to make. She also makes a point about the source of hires that is worth noting. The best hires tend to come from referrals by people who already work for you, from people who have seen both you and the candidate perform under pressure, and who are willing to put their own credibility on the line by making the introduction. This is not because companies should be closed networks, but because a referral from a trusted person contains an implicit endorsement of both the candidate's skills and their likely cultural fit that a cold resume almost never can. And then there is the promotion question, which connects back to the rock star and superstar distinction from the previous part. Promoting someone should be the result of their demonstrated readiness for the new role, not the reward for their excellence in the current one. These two things are related but not identical. The best individual contributor on the team is not automatically the best choice for the management role above them. If anything, the skills that make someone excellent in a deeply technical individual role are sometimes the skills least likely to transfer into management, because management is mostly about enabling other people to do the technical work, which requires a different kind of attention than doing the technical work yourself. The next part brings this all together by looking at how you maintain the overall health of the team as a system, keeping the motivated motivated and the risk of burnout visible before it becomes a resignation. Part 4. Boredom, Burnout, and the Invisible Attrition. The title of this chapter is Techniques for Avoiding Boredom and Burnout, and I want to take both of those words seriously, because they tend to be treated as opposites when they are actually two sides of the same management failure. Burnout is what happens when someone is asked to do too much for too long without recovery time, recognition, or a sense that the effort is leading somewhere meaningful. Boredom is what happens when someone is not asked to do enough, or not given work that stretches them, or is left in a role they have fully mastered with no new horizon in sight. From the outside, these can look quite different. The burned-out person appears stressed and depleted, the bored person appears disengaged and a little flat. but the underlying dynamic is related. In both cases, the person's relationship to their work has become something less than what it could and should be, and a manager who is not paying close attention will miss the early signals until the situation is much further along. The invisible attrition is the phrase I want to focus on, because it names something Kim Scott is pointing at throughout this chapter. When talented people leave an organization, they almost never leave all at once. They leave gradually, in a process that begins well before they hand in a notice. They stop volunteering for extra projects. They stop bringing new ideas to meetings. They start managing their energy very carefully, doing good enough work but not extending themselves beyond what the role requires. They keep coming to work. They are technically still there, but a meaningful portion of them, their initiative, their creativity, their investment in the team's success, has already quietly left. And the cruel irony is that this partial departure often goes unnoticed for the longest in the people who are best at performing competent disengagement, which tends to be your most experienced and professionally polished employees. A junior person who is disengaging will often show it. A senior person who has been managing their professional image for 15 years can look perfectly fine for months, while inwardly having already decided to leave. The daily practice that Kim Scott recommends for catching this before it becomes irreversible is, once again, the regular one-to-one, but with a specific kind of attention. Not just to the content of what people say, but to the energy underneath it. The person who used to propose ideas in the meeting and has stopped proposing ideas. The person who used to stay slightly late when something interesting was happening and now leaves exactly on time. These are soft signals, deniable, ambiguous, easily explained away. They are also often the earliest visible signs of someone who is making a decision you do not know about yet. History gives us a striking large-scale example of what happens when the early signals of disengagement go unread at the institutional level. In the years before the mass emigration of scientists and engineers from East Germany to the West, in the 1950s and early 60s, a process the East German government would eventually try to stop by building the Berlin Wall, the outflow of talent began long before people actually left. There was a quieter, earlier phase where people who intended to leave became less productive, less invested in long-term projects, and more focused on work that could be completed quickly and taken with them. The institutional brain drain was visible in the work before it was visible in the headcount, and by the time it became visible in the headcount, a generation of trained professionals had already made an irreversible decision. Your team is obviously not East Germany, and I am not suggesting your disengaged senior engineer is planning a dramatic escape. The point is that the disengagement precedes the departure, and the disengagement is addressable, but only if it is noticed while it is still disengagement rather than after it has become a resignation letter. Kim Scott's prescription is to take these signals seriously and to address them directly in the one-to-one with the honest version of the question. I have noticed you seem less engaged lately. I might be wrong about that, but I wanted to check in. Is there something about your current work that is not working for you? That question, asked sincerely with a real pause at the end for an honest answer, opens a conversation that the person may have been waiting to have for weeks. In the final part of this chapter, we look at growth management plans, the one practical document Kim Scott recommends actually writing down, and why the act of writing it changes the conversation. Part 5. The growth plan and what it is actually for. The growth management plan sounds like it might be another piece of corporate paperwork, something to be filed in a folder and consulted once a year during performance review season. Kim Scott's version is something quite different, and the difference is worth understanding carefully. She recommends sitting down with each direct report, ideally once a year, and working through a document together that captures three things: where this person is trying to go in their career, what skills, experiences, or knowledge they need to get there, and what specific things over the next 12 months are going to move them meaningfully closer to that destination. Not generic professional development objectives, not a list of the competencies their current role requires them to have. A specific map from where they are now toward where they actually want to go, written in collaboration with the person it is about. The reason writing it down matters is not the document itself. A piece of paper has never developed anyone's career. The reason writing it matters is what the act of writing forces. It forces specificity where vague encouragement usually lives. It is one thing to tell someone in a one-to-one that you think they have real leadership potential and you want to help them grow. It is a quite different thing to sit down together and commit to paper that what leadership potential means in this context is that by the end of next year, you will have led your first cross-functional project, gotten structured feedback from the 3 team leads you collaborated with, and presented the results to senior leadership. Those 2 conversations feel similar but produce very different probabilities of anything actually changing. The growth plan is also a form of accountability for the manager, which is perhaps its most underappreciated function. Once you have written down what you are going to do to help someone grow, you have made a commitment. You can be asked about it at the next one-to-one. You can be asked about it by the person's future manager if they move to a different team. The document makes the implicit explicit, and the implicit, when it comes to career development, almost always benefits from being made explicit. There is a parallel to this in the history of diplomacy that I find illuminating. The process of writing a treaty, even between parties who have a general understanding of their relationship and their intentions, forces each side to specify what exactly they are committing to in a way that handshakes and verbal agreements do not. The history of international relations is full of cases where 2 parties thought they had the same understanding of their relationship until the moment they tried to write it down and discovered they had been imagining quite different things. The act of specifying, of saying this, is what I mean in precise enough terms that another person can hold me to it, is itself clarifying in a way that good faith intentions alone are not. The chapter closes with something Kim Scott is very direct about. Partnering with your direct reports on their growth is not a side project or an optional extra that you get to if there is time left after the real work of management. It is the real work of management. A team where people feel genuinely invested in, where their development is treated as a serious ongoing project rather than an annual ritual, produces better results, retains better people, and creates the kind of reputation that makes recruiting the next generation of those people significantly easier. And here is the honest note at the end. This work is genuinely hard, and it takes time that you do not always feel you have, and there will be quarters when the operational demands crowd it out, and you will not do it as well as you mean to. The goal is not perfection. The goal is to treat it as the priority it actually is, often enough, consistently enough, that the people who work for you can feel it rather than just hearing about it in a company all-hands meeting. That is Chapter 7. In Chapter 8, we move from the people to the process and look at the machinery of getting things done together, which turns out to have its own specific set of ways to go brilliantly right and spectacularly wrong.